Welcome back, everyone, to the monthly AVH study group webinars. Tonight we're going to take case taking a step further by looking at what are the obstacles to your prescribing homeopathically, whether it's your prescription or whether it's your clients and or patients. And once again, Dr. Beal is going to regale us with her thoughts. So, Sue, would you take it away?
Hey guys. Yeah, we're thanks Jeff for that. I neglected to have pretty pictures to show folks tonight, so you can gaze off at your screensavers or whatever. We've been sort of talking a little bit from the beginning of the year about things that might be obstacles in our homeopathic prescribing and our case management and that sort of stuff. And we, when we think about obstacles to cure and obstacles to how cases proceed, a lot of times we're thinking about things like, inappropriate diet and use of other medicaments and some other dynamics and interference by vaccinations and past treatments and all of that sort of stuff. And I kind of want to push that a little bit further in our conversations over the next short while. So this is going to be an interactive webinar, more so than a one-way webinar. That can be a little bit difficult in this venue, depending on what folks are doing. At the other end, we can either keep everybody muted from Jeff's command central, or we can unmute everybody and have individuals mute themselves. If you go to the webinar control panel, you can see there's a little microphone thing, and if you click on that with your cursor, it'll turn it red or green whether you're muted or not muted. So we can we can work like that to get some feedback there. So we can also use the chat or the raising your hands for the questions, and Jeff can monitor that, and I can monitor that too. What we don't want to do is have a whole lot of crashing and banging and feeding chickens and milking cows and barking dogs in the background. So I really believe a lot in sort of cosmic coordination of things, and it's really interesting that in some correspondence to the smaller listserv, where the current class or the last two just graduated classes of the Pitcairn Institute of Veterinary Homeopathy, Andrea Tassi, who is one of the instructors in that course, wrote a very interesting letter talking about fear and talking about how she was reminded by some cases that she'd had in her practice. One of the obstacles that we have as veterinary homeopaths in general, is that we commonly face is just that fear. And in the context of her letter, she specifically talked about the fear, particularly of not using conventional or allopathic treatments, and she gave three cases. And for folks, I'm just looking to see who's here. The three cases were one about a cat with ringworm herself, who got a big old bite from her cat, and also another cat with a FIV cat with anterior uveitis and iritis and all of those accompanying symptoms. And so she talked about those cases and talked about how the fear in her reared up and how she overcame that sort of stuff. So I'd like to use that as a jumping off point for conversation this evening. And I like to remind us in that whole conversation is, we practice at the intersection of three pathologies and dynamics, and that's the dynamic and pathology of our client, the dynamic and pathology of the individual animal in our care, and also the dynamic and pathology of the clinician. And somewhere out in the intersection of all of those things, we do our work. One of the things that I I don't want to jump into and don't think it's prudent for us to jump into is to presume, you know, that it's always fear. It may be other things that we lump into that description of fear, and it's very much the same, approach as if we were going to be repertorizing a symptom, and have we actually accurately identified that symptom, and then the other part that I think would be very interesting to consider here is what really is the root of whatever that is that we're going to, for this conversation, call fear. We could call it Ralph if you wanted. So is it the fear of lack of success in our cases? Is it the fear of being judged by the client? Is it the fear of our lack of confidence in our skills or our ability to get the case, so to speak, to prescribe, to interpret? Is it our fear or lack of confidence in our ability to interpret symptoms and those sorts of things? Is it because we feel that it is our obligation as a clinician to not have anything in our care be painful or discomforting, uncomfortable, have discomfort? So that's part of what I think would be interesting and creative to talk about. And Jeff and I were having a little bit of conversation before the webinar. And one of the other things that when we're lumping this whole thing that we're calling, fear in or Ralph for this conversation, is also how does the client and the client's response influence sometimes our prescribing. And so sometimes, it's actually the fear of the client, um, and that is can be difficult as far as case management and stuff goes, and sometimes that the fear of the client actually sort of throws fuel to the fire that we have as well. And I can't think, I'm just looking at the list of folks who are folks who are here. I can't think that among the group of us who are gathered here in more or less person, that there's anybody in this group that has not had that kind of gut clenching thing, like, oh my God, what am I going to do with this case? How am I going to manage it as a homeopath? Am I confident enough to manage it as a homeopath, or do I decide that I'm going to step out and use other treatments or modalities, or those kinds of things? And how do we both gain the confidence to just prescribe in really difficult situations? And I know uh, for most of the people who are on the call, I'm aware of some really, really difficult situations that folks have prescribed for very, very successfully. And so how do we manage that? How do we manage that sort of emotional response that we have as clinicians, and get it sitting over in the corner enough that we can actually do our best work? I don't know if we want to start with, anybody who's got something that they want to contribute. We can ask the folks on the panel to break the ice here, and just see. But I think it's a really, really significant, for us to be able to go forth confidently and competently as clinicians, and recognize that it's actually possible to do case management on very difficult cases. If it would be helpful to the group, I'm also happy to talk about the cases that Andrea presented on the listserv also, just to give some context.
And I just posted in the chat, relating back to fear, a great article that Andre shared a couple of years ago. It's a graduation address on maintaining your equanimity, which helps manage fear, both your fear and the client's. But I would love to start, Sue, by continuing our discussion of, what I perceive, at least in my practice, as the biggest obstacle and the biggest fear, which is the fear of symptom, client fear of symptoms. Let's assume that for now at least, that the clinician has 100% confidence that the body is able to heal regardless of the named disease.
It's interesting that Jeff, and I, I'm going to toss it back at you just a little bit. And part of the question when we're examining these kinds of fears is that why or what is it that's happening that makes that a particularly prickly part for you? You know, why is that that particular part of case management difficult, or it seems to come up a lot in your particular clients, or does it make crazy, or what is it about the manner in which we choose to explain things to our clients that they may or may not get it, as far as that. But certainly, certainly that whole business of medicating on any little change is really common, particularly I find with folks who are new to the game. I was working with a farmer who who's a study group lady, very interested in homeopathy, very bright, works really hard to understand stuff, but didn't have a lot of particularly clear exposure to the art and science of homeopathy until we crossed paths. And her tendency was every little thing she had to make a prescription for. I talked to actually three of my colleagues today about the same thing, just, that they've had clients in the past that every little thing they have to, redose a remedy when the least little thing happens, or they're very concerned about that. For me, one of the things that I found has been really true is that there's a very big difference, both in humans and in animals. I find and believe, between pain and suffering, and also between pain and discomfort. And so um, we tend to oftentimes have clients that are not clear about those things. And we often have clients that are forget that it's ergonomic, for example, for an animal to carry a leg rather than limp. And that makes things look worse because they're not landing on things. But I think even bigger than that is that whole idea of discomfort, um, and the difference between pain and actual suffering, and a lot of people don't understand that either, both on the human side and on the animal side. What's your experience been with your clients?
Well, the preponderance of my clients, their animals are their children. And just like you would with your or just like a lot of people would with their 1 or 2 year old kids, they do equate any symptom with pain and suffering, even as far as a red skin, a red ear. Gosh, heaven forbid a red ear, but any almost any symptom. I'll give you an example from today's appointment with somebody who, granted, English isn't her first language, but still after 6 months, you would think that that she understood. We've been educating, she's been learning the true significance of symptoms, that symptoms are just a reflection of the imbalance, and they're our best friends when it comes to homeopathic prescribing. But regardless, she sees anything from not wanting to get up and get out of the car today, from a red spot, from a little flaky spot on the skin that's itchy for the dog, to a cough or a sneeze. Those are all pain and suffering, and she doesn't want her baby, and then she said this today, she doesn't want her child to suffer.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm up against that, man. It may just be a matter of time, but 6 months that twice a week this person asks for support.
I think some
I,
of it, uh, I know what's been true for me, is being able to frame that in context. So, and I do a lot of it's relatively healthier to do this, see this, experience this than it is to you know this or this or that or that. So that's part of it. I also don't tend to talk about symptom. I really choose my words really carefully, and I also talk about stuff as sort of symptoms are the best voice that the body has to indicate the imbalance. um, and so a lot of times you can it's relatively healthier to be limping than it is to be hiding in the closet. It's relatively healthier to have sound mental and emotional stuff and not getting all freaked out about whatever the mental and emotional symptom is, then to have ear discharge rather than be doing that. It's relatively healthier to have scratchy skin than it is to have a seizure. And part of it part of it is just keeping to reinforcing that how the body triages symptoms, reminding people that they put them in the relatively least harmful place for the overall function of that individual. And some people can actually grasp that. Part of what we do, and I know I've talked with several people on this call over the period of time, is part of what we do is we help people be brave. And for some people, that takes a lot of coaching and hand holding. For some people, it runs into that danger area where they're really really dependent on us, and that tends to it can be a clinical management issue. How much time and energy are we able and willing to provide to allow that person to be brave? And sometimes it's a the kind of context or example that we put in things. Um, I know there's folks on the call that have had those kinds of experiences with folks, and it's truly amazing when you see it happen. I mean, just totally, totally amazing. Um, and it's frustrating, when we have those cases that sort of seem to be stuck in that. And part of it is, you don't want to necessarily pander to the client's pathology, nor do you want to blow her off like, oh, well, that's this client's pathology, that she has, no tolerance of that, or her perception may be not as healthy as it could be, if she was fully experiencing all her human emotions and stuff. But that's also something that we need to take into consideration as well.
I guess a lot of people feel that the, despite knowing significance, that the best action for managing their fear is to do something, whether it's a drug or a supplement or a remedy. Yeah.
That's what I was just actually going to say. That is part of our job in the sort of coaching part that we do as clinicians, the case management and that sort of stuff, is to darn well that folks are going to go do something. And so part of it is, you know, to keep, there's various philosophies about how to do this, keep them distracted or occupied, and give their animal or their own body time to catch up and get organized and responsive. But the other thing is to without giving them the laundry list of the, certainly with this lady, you don't want to give her the laundry list of the 37 things that might happen, but you know she's going to do something. And so what is it that we can provide for this individual client to do that's going to be the relatively least detrimental to the overall forward progress of the situation? And also, what is it that we can do that's going to, what she does may actually have to be something that also distracts her from sitting there and counting the scruff marks or whatever. So it could be something like prescribing a walk or a different kind of interaction with the animal or a distraction kind of thing. It could be something like you may be able to give her a project of let's explore modalities about is there anything that makes this itching or redness or limp or whatever better or worse. And so you could give her some mini experiments to do and that sort of stuff. I found that's been helpful, and it's also given me information that you can use with the case. That if they've got a red goopy ear, that they're going to want to do something for that. And so let's give them some suggestions of things that they can do. Even if you've got a situation where you might not think that ear needs to be tended every day. It might be useful to get them on a twice a week cleaning. That we're just they're going to feel like they're ministering. One of the other things, and then I really um, I, I concur with you. I'm sure that folks have got personal examples out there. But one of the other things that I think that's really hard for us to realize is that it's very, very difficult for people to have relationships with their animals from the standpoint of interacting with them when they're healthy. Same with people having relationships with people. And I can remember a period of time where I had 6, 7 maybe cases of animals with degenerative myelopathy come to the clinic. And these dogs were all down and not functioning and couldn't walk far. Some of them needed to be carried. Some of them could walk around the yard. Some of them were in various levels of whatever. And over a period of 6 months, I had every one of those animals do two things. One of them is that they had clinical improvement, significant clinical improvement. And the second thing that happened was every single one of those animals left care. And the reason that they left care was not because, oh my gosh, the bells rang and the angels sang and they were cured, but they left care because all of the clients couldn't deal with the animal in a greater sense of wellness. The client's relationship with that animal was as the caregiver, as the looker after. The client's family dynamics were built around that also. And so I had, for example, one dog um, who decided that, well, he didn't decide. I mean, he got better and he was feeling better and he was able to ambulate, and then he wouldn't stay in the yard and he was always going off, in the cornfield and looking at things and exploring stuff. And I made clients really mad because now the dog was not just kind of sitting on the porch moping and unable to move. And so they left care because the dog was running away, and they didn't, you know, by fencing or restraining or anything. That was not on their radar. The most marked one for me was in that whole 6 or 7 month run was Malamute. And this was a big dog. Oh my gosh, he weighed about 140 pounds. He was white. The people had a large, large, large boat style Buick that had burgundy velvet upholstery from the dashboard to the back window. And the people would come in. They had this big elaborate rigmarole where they would have these special blankets and everything and coat the car with the blankets, and the lady wore special pants that she would roll up afterwards so that she was covered with hair. And the lady and the man, their whole relationship was looking after the dog, getting it fed, getting it up and down the steps, getting it bathed, getting it into the car, taking it to the vet, going from vet to vet to vet, that nobody could quote fix the dog, but that was their entire day. And after a couple of months under care, this dog would hop in and out of the car and would go up and down the steps and was eating better. And they didn't have to try, 47 different things under the full moon on a purple placemat to get the dog to eat. And, the dog was a long way from being 100%, but but it was doing really, really, really well clinically. And what happened was the couple suddenly realized that they had to deal with themselves. You know, that she had to talk to him about other stuff than, oh my God, what are we going to do with the dog? How are we going to manage the dog? Um, and they left care because they were unable to communicate as a couple in any other way other than ultra focused on their dog's pathology, clinical situation, you know, project, and that sort of stuff. And it was a really interesting thing for me to have those cases all unfold like that. And the other thing that's been really interesting is as many animals as I've seen over the years since that situation, I rarely, if ever, have anything come into my practice with that diagnostic label on it. It's really funny. It's just like, oh, you just never see them. You had that run of them and learned that lesson and never see them again. But that goes back to say, you know, is as as humans and as animals get healthier and get more species appropriate, and we're not stuck in the disease predominance, we need to begin to start to have new ways to relate to the animals under their care, you know, to the animals in your household, to the other people in the household, and that sort of thing. And that can be, in my experience, a really, really powerful thing because we are generally don't know how to do that. We're not taught how to do it societally. We're not exactly set up for that. The reason that most people are driven to have pets is because of, you know, that um, ministering to them, caretaking to them, wanting some sort of dependent, infantile kind of relationship. And that's a hard dynamic to shift. That's a really hard dynamic to shift when these animals start becoming more independent, when they don't have to be as tenuously managed and those kinds of things, or when we start having animals that behave more species appropriately, but maybe not exactly the way the client prefers to have the interaction. So the animal becomes more independent. It may not want to be on the client's lap all the time. It may start to, you know, go out more independently. It may have different relationships with other animals in the house and that sort of stuff. And a lot of clients don't like that. You know, they just don't like it. They like to have those really dependent Velcro type animals that, you know. I can remember seeing a client with a dog who, oh my gosh, that dog would be looking adoringly at the lady all the time. You know, couldn't go a step away from the lady, and she just loved it. You know, she thought that was just the greatest thing in the world. Anywhere I go, the dog's there, follows me into the bathroom, can't walk in the kitchen, can't do anything. And this was a dog that had, you know, also had a job to do. But once that dog was under care, it got much more autonomous and independent, and it was very. It took some very interesting discussions with the lady to talk about how that was, you know, better for the dog in that larger scope, and more fulfilling of the total personality of the dog than to have them stuck in that. You know, fawning, submissive, obsequious kind of behavior pattern. It's very interesting.
Can you say a little more? Linda has some great thoughts, but can you say a little more about that first? Because my experience is just the opposite, that most clients are thrilled when their animals start showing sign, no matter how long they've been disabled, that they're thrilled when they start showing some signs of independence. And it's the rare exceptions, such as a couple that couldn't relate to each other
Well, that was
uh,
extreme,
yeah,
certainly.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I, I, you know, that was a particularly extreme case that, you know, which was an interesting example. I still think that it's difficult for people to relate to others who are fully healthy. like healthy and vibrant. I see it to a greater, lesser extent, but in my experience, and I can only speak for my experience, that's what I that's what I've seen over the years. And there's however many of us sitting in the room here this evening, and we all attract a different kind of client. They all come to us for whatever reason they find us in the universe, and we all tend to attract different kinds of clients with different needs or different, case presentations or whatever. It's really, that's a whole other kind of curious metaphysical conversation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Linda, do you want to ask? Not really. Let me just... Okay, Linda wrote a few things. She said that since the observations and actions, and now we're talking yes about symptom management, since the observations and actions of the client are so important to the success of our cases, what would it look like to discuss the evolution of the homeopathic client into a more mature and capable observer and relayer of symptoms like we discussed in other aspects of medicine?
What would it look like, or what is that transition that we see from as the client learns that?
Linda? That's what Linda wrote, but she doesn't trust her microphone to
She
speak.
doesn't trust her
So,
microphone.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm using
Okay.
it now. Can you hear me?
very
Yeah.
well,
Hi.
yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this headset that I'm wearing, I haven't ever used as a microphone. I didn't even know it worked as
It
one.
Well,
works. It
awesome.
works
Yeah,
great.
it's
But
great.
but we really, I think, need to be trained in more counseling the human instead of constantly talking about the animal and thinking that the human's just going to catch on. I think we need to tell them exactly what we expect from them and how their kind of willingness to grow into being the kind of observer that allows us to be successful in, and not just like, observing a symptom and treating it and then telling us the next day.
Right. I
And
think you're
I think
exactly
we have
right.
to be really clear that this is their job. They have a job to do. And if they don't do their job, they're going to screw up our ability to do our job.
I agree with you, Linda. A lot. I don't usually couch it that they're going to screw up our ability to do our job. I usually say to them, that, and I start from the very beginning, at the case taking moment, all the way through treatment, is that this animal better than anybody else. You may not have the language to describe stuff. You may not understand the significance of what you're seeing, but you know them better than anybody else, and that theirs are the eyes and the voice and the other sensory things that with which we observe, that is able to tell, you're the voice of this animal, and that the success of this situation is dependent upon that continued back and forth. And there's ways, I think, that we can help coach people about that. One of the examples that I use a lot, and we're in an interesting position as homeopaths, I think, because we're doing more than two things, but we're doing at least two things at the same time. And one is we're looking at overall patterns, but also we're looking at significance of individual symptoms. And what tends to happen is we get lost in the individual symptoms, and we forget about the overall patterns. And I find clients do that. They're worried about looking at individual symptoms, and so it ends up like you're looking at a page full of dot 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 dot, but they don't stand back, and we as clinicians also don't stand back enough to actually say, oh my gosh, that page of dots is really a picture. I think of the pointillism type, pictures that we see that are these discrete dots that make patterns and stuff. But yeah,
Mhm.
and and part of the challenge also, I think, that in the knife blade that we walk a lot of times is that we need to be able to trust our clients. We need to be able to trust the veracity of their reports, but we also have to be able to be a little bit suspicious. Are they really accurate? Are we going to believe everything they say? Is that, that's nobody's fault. That's just that they've never had a veterinarian before that's interested in all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time it's like, yeah, 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 like let's talk about whatever. But we're talking about things that they would talk about to their girlfriend or or their kids or their family or whatever, like, oh, look at this really weird thing that Fifi does, or all that stuff that they would talk about, that they would never think about talking to the veterinarian about, because in the past nobody with the label veterinarian has really cared about that stuff. That's just all the, oh, isn't it cute stuff that you might chat about, on the entering and exiting into the office visit. But that's always just been sort of peripheral. And oftentimes that's the stuff that's the stuff, there's the case, right? is
Mm-hmm.
in something weird that has nothing to do with the presenting complaint, ostensibly nothing to do with the presenting complaint in the client's mind and in other clinicians' minds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know how it's been for you. I find that I tell people very clearly, what should I look for, Doc? I can't tell you to look for the pink elephants on your lawn, because you're going to miss the purple hippopotamus if I tell you that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm really good at not always telling people what exactly I want them to look for, but giving them a framework of stuff. And I try to not overwhelm them in the details, and I try to coach the clients to start to be able to make comparisons, compared
Mm-hmm.
to how he was 2 weeks ago, compared to how he was 6 months ago. If you're going to score something, I get really I get really, I certainly get really grumpy with clinicians that I'm mentoring, about making sure you've got an assessment at the end of every interaction that you have with a client. You need an assessment and you need a plan, 1, 2, 3, or
Okay.
6 or whatever. But I also, I also look at folks. Um, I expect that from my clients as well. And some
Mm-hmm.
people aren't very good at the beginning because they just don't know how to do it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I always try and take them in relative steps. So compared to our last, visit, this is better. You can see how this dynamic has changed, and these are the kinds of things that we're going to look at going forward. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't, I tell them it's not a cosmic test, because people are really afraid. They want to do the best thing. They want to be cooperative. They don't want to be misleading for the most part. Um, you know, and we that's where, as I said earlier, we're working with that client's pathology as well. So what's the individualized way that we can get the best information from that client? I find oftentimes emails are not it for
Mm-hmm.
those difficult clients that
Mm-hmm.
they need to be coached. You're really right. Yeah.
Um,
And
um,
having said that, you know, I do very different. I have a very different approach when I'm doing herd health stuff. And so a lot of times, sometimes some of our best things happen when people forget to call us back, or they can't get in to see us or whatever. And I think it was Jane had some really really nice cases of, like, 4 months later and you haven't been able to see them, and they've got this really amazing report, or oh, we should have, we tried to see them on Saturday and that didn't work, and they couldn't come for a week, and by the time that had happened, the water had flowed over the bridge, and oh my gosh, there, we were much clearer about the response. How do you do that with your clients, Linda?
Well, if I'm doing email, I have a list of symptoms that I'm tracking, and I want them to report in on each symptom, because I have some I was in Panama for 2 years, and during the time I was taking the course, and now I'm back in the United States, but I'm still treating some patients in Panama.
Sure.
And so I have a list of things that they have to report on, and at the end it says, is there anything new? And, please describe in full, but it's really difficult. I mean, this is one of the most difficult things I've ever studied in all these 30 some years of being a veterinarian. And I just think I need to take my time and really work through this process.
Do you
And go
do you
ahead.
communicate with those people in voice, or is it all by email?
Well, the ones in Panama, I only communicate with, but I went to visit them. They were in San Antonio with the dog, like in November, and I went to see it. So we're pretty recent. Um,
Okay.
but it's and they'll be back in the United States again, I think in September. So, I'll probably see it again
I can
in
tell you
September.
I can tell you what's been true for me. And what I find almost without exception is that the spontaneous declaration of the client is really important. And sometimes I find that gets lost in checklists. So if
Yeah.
there's any way with the Panama person, and I say this, my practice is typically, I may have clients that I see at interval, and I do a lot of telemedicine stuff, and did a lot of telemedicine before telemedicine was kind of the popular way to describe stuff. And so I'd have clients where I might see them once a year, I might see them once every 6 months, I might see them once a quarter. I've had clients where I never met them in person ever. And some of those guys preceded, it's so easy now to take a picture and shoot a video or whatever.
Hmm.
But what I really found was being able to talk to those humans so they could hear my voice and I could hear their voice. And also you would for me was a lot easier to be able to get a little hook on the thing that was bothering them the most, bothering the human the most.
Hmm.
What were they most afraid of, for example? What was the symptom that might be concerning them the most? It may seem very trivial to us. It may be that red spot. I see that all the time. You got an animal that comes in, he's like dying of kidney failure, he's dying of heart failure, he's got all of this internal stuff that has him really, really wobbling. And clients are not really afraid of that. He's old, he's got kidney failure, he's got heart stuff, but they can't see that. And as soon as the internal economy gets itself settled down and they have enough woomph to get the symptoms on the exterior, they're like way more concerned about some ear discharge, that than they ever were about a grade 5 heart murmur, or renal values that were crazy, or whatever. And so that fact that it's there, it's visible, now we can see it. That's also easier to be afraid of something because we can see it. But I found for me that making sure that we had time to talk to people, that even if it was just a short check-in, but that cases in my experience that got out of control or get out of control are those ones where there's just pages and pages and pages of email follow-up and stuff, because that whole pattern, it gets to be all the little points, you never see the picture, and the client is in all the little points mode, not seeing the big picture.
Okay. I'll work on it. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Hello.
Linda, just further to what Sue said, I do find with those people that you don't see rarely that voice is great, much better than email, but even better is video. And you can do a Zoom video, get your own virtual
Oh yeah.
exam for free, and just have your clients click a link, and there you and they are together, on video, and you can look at the animal and really, really hold their hands, in person that way.
Yeah, That's when I say in voice, I absolutely mean extending that. But yeah, Zoom has an ability to do that. WhatsApp has an ability to do that. The go to meeting stuff. I'm not aware that they have a no charge ability to do that. And then there's all those other platforms with different cell services and that that sort of stuff that you can use as well. Yeah. It can be a really intimate relationship, phone, advisory work and phone advisory work and telemedicine or whatever we want to call it in this. It can be it can be really rewarding, I found. It doesn't suit everybody. It doesn't suit every client. It doesn't suit every clinician, but there, you can have some tremendous relationship and trust built across that. And you're right, it probably is the hardest thing. Doing homeopathy, I mean. We're back.
Oh, sorry, I was muting myself, but thank you, Sue, for
There you go.
reminding me. Sorry about that. What I was babbling to nobody was that Barb has her hand raised, but Barb, you're unmuted, so go ahead and jump right in. We'd love it.
Okay. So I was going to say that I think sometimes, a practitioner has a lot of anxiety. One possibility or a lot of anxiety is fear is that, maybe they need a remedy,
Oh, yes.
and should seek out care. Um, and the other thing I think is because that happened to me when I had a lot of anxiety and then, found out that I needed a different remedy. And so, then that was better. Um, and the other thing I think sometimes, maybe a person has a lot of anxiety when, that there's something that's not quite right in the case. So, I think one has to look at, revisit that case.
I think I agree, Barb, very much. One of the things that I found in my experience is I think as veterinarians we share a lot of similar pathology, and I think that pathology is confused by the reality that most of us have had rabies vaccine, even though I'm old enough that I had
Yeah.
baby hamster kidney. Um, uh, and I think that we bring a lot of pathology to the table just by virtue of being veterinarians. The thing that got us into wanting to be a veterinarian, and then some of the things that have generally happened to us as a herd, above and beyond our individual pathologies. But my experience is been that having had some competent care and your approach to stuff, your recognition that it's not our job to save the world, our recognition about the value of our work isn't necessarily predicated on dead or alive, the dead or alive pile or whatever, and our ability to enter into relationships at much different and ways than from our perspective of health versus our perspective of more predominant disease, that really has made a difference. And also, like clarity of thought too, and being able to see
Yeah,
those patterns in relationships. That it's huge. It's huge, huge. Yeah.
yeah. And I think, some clients too, like I have one, she, you know, after a while, really wanted to start doing other things just because, some people are so, you know, s- so still into the allopathic thinking, homeopathy is too much anxiety for them. And, she's maybe better with something like acupuncture. You know, I mean, I just don't think it's for every situation, for every client. And, maybe different dogs of hers, so I know, I think there is some individual um, variations in the clients too with what they really want. And if they're stressed out, then it's not a good situation for them or for the practitioner.
I absolutely agree. And I don't think that that's necessarily a limitation, certainly on the art and science of homeopathy, and certainly not on the individual practitioner. And um, part of the challenge here is that we I believe that we need to allow people to have their own experiences, and maybe
Yep.
for those clients that their experience is being a tourist in the in the smorgasbord of potential treatment stuff, or I
Yeah.
certainly believe that when we look at what's happening, with symptoms, and I carry that to the work with animals too. Is that they need to have their own experiences. That's a much deeper discussion. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a sense of as we become more healthy as clinicians, we recognize that that's not a reflection of our clinical ability or clinical experience, or we're not good homeopaths. And the way that those clients end up leaving care tends to be much more gentle and graceful than it is, well, then fine, just go away and like go somewhere else, that I don't care, you're going to
Right.
go do that, rather than from us staying from a pretty healthy perspective. Is it doesn't seem like you were either resonating or you're comfortable with this plan of care, or whatever, and it doesn't become an ultimatum or anything. It just becomes it just sort of unfolds much more gracefully and without as much angst from the clinician. But in the context of what you said, the healthier clinician, the clinician that's really in touch with their full range of emotion and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one has to, do their job to the best of your ability, and you offer that. And if it's not what somebody wants, or at least you can sleep at night,
Right.
because you've done what you feel is right.
Right. Right. And that, I see that a challenge. That was a challenge for me years ago, and a challenge for our colleagues now, is that that especially as folks are balancing either a conventional practice that does homeopathy, or balancing that charm bracelet of other than conventional modalities that people use, and that's a continuum, not an absolute. And so, it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to uh, give that client, I see clinicians like continually forcing themselves to jump through hoops to keep the client happy, or keep the client in the practice, or well, we'll try this, or we'll do this, or we'll do this, or we'll do this. And it may be that that those people just don't need to be in your practice. And I don't say that in a grumpy way at all. It's just that they're looking for something that you're unable to offer. And I find that the more the more you know, like if you're practicing from the perspective of a homeopath, when we look at how we look at health and disease, and when we look at how we respond to symptoms, or respond to treatment modalities, I mean, how symptoms respond to treatment modalities, the yardstick is exactly the same, you know. So that, you know, that's the other thing. You know, you can draw your own personal line in the sand about what are you going to offer or not offer to folks, and you get more comfortable doing that. And it isn't snotty. You don't blow them off. It's just, you know, I just don't, I'm just not able to help you, or I don't, you know, I don't know, or there's probably somebody better out there, or whatever, instead of contorting yourself to try and make, you know, fulfill an expectation that the client may have that's impossible for you to fulfill. You're doing 100% homeopathy now, Barb? Or still?
I do about a little bit of acupuncture,
Mm-hmm.
but 75 to 99% category of homeopathy.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I think it's easier in some ways, you know, to have a fewer options almost.
And Jan, would you mind sharing what you wrote, that you clearly remember the moment when you realized that you were no longer fearful about, you know, practicing homeopathy? What was that moment? What was what helped that shift?
Well, I think I was just finishing up with another client, and it just hit me, because I think there was part of the fear for me had been also just fear of litigation, you know, trying to, so I'm always very careful to explain to people that there are other options, you know, and I tell them the ones that I know about, and I invite them to get a second opinion or whatever, you know. But the fear of litigation, or, you know, something going wrong, and then they look at the record and, oh my God, she didn't even give antibiotics, blah blah blah, you know, that kind of thing. But then one day it just was like things were, you know, homeopathy works. So it was going nicely, and I just realized, you know, this is fine. And I'm, you know, let's see, how old must I have been? Because I made a mental note. It was 15 years into practice. I started homeopathy right out of school. And so that would have been, I was 47 when that happened. And it's really nice, you know,
Yeah.
fearless, very, I really feel for people who suffer with fear a lot and anxiety, you know, because it's such a burden.
Yeah. And it's not cavalier either, you know, your lack of anxiety.
No, well, I guess it depends on who you talk to.
Yeah. Point. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's not, from my perspective, it's not.
No. No, and from mine, knowing your work as well. Yeah. I remember two really significant times in my practice. One was the day that I realized that how could I in conscience give a medicine that I didn't know what the action of the medicine was. And and that was a huge day for me. I remember it. I mean, it certainly wasn't yesterday, but I thought, holy shit, pardon me, but it was that. Holy shit, how could I give this antibiotic when I really don't know what the action of the medicine is? Yeah, it, you know, it cures whatever, in the old language, and it might make them vomit or not want to eat, but I have no idea what the action of that medicine is. And that was the day for me where I packed all that stuff up. you know, because I used to have it sitting out in the shelves and I didn't use it very much, but that was the day that I packed everything up in
Yeah.
boxes, other than, you know, other than Remedy. And if I really needed to, or thought I needed to go and gaze at it, you know, I'd have to climb up on top of the shelf, you know. And the other day, the other one that and that happened for me, I think, um, in the first session after the first advanced course. I think after coming back from that, which I did the advanced course right after the professional course. So you know, I've been probably doing serious homeopathic practice in however long that was. But the other one that I remember happening was, you know, I thought I could or couldn't treat certain diagnostic labels. And I remember one day realizing that the guys that are treating cancer conventionally are just doing experimental shit because they really don't know what's going on. And I mean, it's well-intentioned experimental shit. Don't misunderstand me at all. But they really have no idea how those animals are going to respond to what the well-intentioned scientific calculations are. And I remember the day where I thought, well, I don't know how they're going to respond either. And you know, the oncologists do something and there's a response, and then they just do something else depending on what the response is. You know, you either keep doing that or you do something else. And I remember deciding, well, I could do that too with Remedy, and at the same time I could offer a a, a, a better, more intimate, more personalized, you know, larger view relationship with the clients. You know, that the medicine was not a separate thing that was imposed upon that. And those two, for me, were the two watersheds of being much more confident and less fearful about what I was, you know, what I was doing on the, you know, on the day to day. And that was, those were watershed stuff. You know, it's just kind of like what you were saying, Jane, is that you just realize like, oh yeah, hey, we'll do this. It was like the first time I ever, you know, back when I was studied acupuncture, and I came out of an exam room and I'd had a whole evening where everything got a, you know, traditional Chinese medicine diagnosis on the chart. And it was just like, poof, I just did it. I wasn't even thinking about doing it, you know.
Well, I just realized also that that 15-year mark is happening again because now I'm 30 years out,
Yeah.
and so I've been fearless about homeopathy for half of my career, and I can tell you it just keeps getting better.
Yeah.
It's nice, and all you have to do really is just communicate with the client and explain things. And so, you know, luckily I have an assistant who's heard my spiel 1,000 times, and sometimes she just starts the spiel herself, which is really nice. But, you know, but talking about, because you know, sometimes I get into other options, and I also get into suppression and palliation and cure, and, you know, the whole approach that we're taking. And it's very new to most people.
Yes, it
So
is.
you have to communicate all that stuff, and it gets repetitive after a while, but it's important.
Yeah. And going back to your experimentation by oncologists on their patients, and that we can do as well, if not much better, using remedies. I'm reading a bunch of papers on quality of life versus length of life and the use of various medications, and 90% of what they use have no verification whatsoever in
Exactly so.
either quality or length of life. But they offer the promise of of remission. I don't think they even use the word cure. So yeah, and that applies as well in this paper, at least to pretty much every drug. They're saying, how can you, and this is an MD talking, how can you in good consciousness recommend a drug that you need to test it on 200 patients in order to show any improvement? You know, if the efficacy of the drug is totally unproven. So yeah, but unfortunately, as Jean indicated, with litigation, there's that standard of care issue. The standard of care.
I also want to just make the point, because I'm not necessarily oncology bashing, because there's some really interesting stuff happening now. But what is happening is, as we're able to do more individualized medicine in the conventional field in a way that wasn't being done even 3 to 5 years ago. I mean, it was more individualized than when I had my whatever epiphany that had me, decide, yeah, okay, I'll treat, I'll treat stuff with a diagnostic label of cancer with homeopathy and just treat it, um, and it's interesting. Sue, oh God, help me. What's her last name? Jeff from England. Armstrong. Yeah, Sue's done a series of presentations over time, talking about how conventional medicine guys are now catching up with stuff that the homeopaths have said for several hundred years. And if you ever get the opportunity to either read any of those papers or hear her speak, she's quite articulate about about those things, and has them kind of in a well presented way. And one of the things that, what's the newest thing in conventional medicine now is individualized medicine, and the fact that our poop changes when we're sick. And I go back and I look at the bowel nosodes and stuff from however many years ago that said that sick people had different poop than healthy people. And I just find it really fun, actually, to just talk about that stuff or think about that stuff.
And just one more thing before I know we have to go, but in that individualized medicine, personalized medicine, that was the goal that oncologists especially had, and that modern
Right.
medical docs had. As soon as the genome was sequenced, well, a couple of years ago, the NIH said, no, we can't do it. We can't say we're ever going to offer personalized or individualized medicine. So now you've got to call it precision medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're using the genes and we're using what we know about individuality, as you said, at our level without understanding or accepting vitality or the life force, or really even having it within the medical framework. We'll use all the information that we can to use this tool that we call now precision medicine. It's quite striking that personalized medicine is dead.
Well, and it's interesting though, Jeff. You said it right there, and that the difference between using that information in a vitalist context and a reductionist context. And
Right.
When we talk about, for example, the work that Andre Sain is doing with his seriously ill patients, using those cutting edge tools of quote modern medicine, but using them in a context of as a vitalist. And I really think there's a difference, and I think there's a difference. I think, to me, that's the big
Yep.
difference, for sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you use that example because Andre's focus for now 4 or 5 years has been cancer, patients with cancer.
Cancer and seriously difficult to treat.
He's been doing, and he feels that he's crossed the threshold with everything but ALS and cancer.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting, I grew up. My father does some really amazing work with life-threatening disease and cancer patients and that sort of stuff. And a lot of his work is well, it's on the dynamic level, but just that same thing, recognition that looking at it in that whole vitalist perspective, and the recognition of why people are sick in the way that they're sick at the specific times that they're sick. You know, people always get sick at meaningful times and in meaningful places, and he brought that to the table, you know, not as a medical professional, and had really amazing, you know, amazing life-changing things happening because he had that in, you know, he didn't use this language, but because he had it in the vitalist tradition, you know. It's very interesting, and I think about that a lot as he's getting older, and you know, I look at the body of experience and knowledge he has and think, oh my God, how are we going to capture that? You know, it's going to poof. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway,
Okay.
that's been it.
Yep. Any other thoughts? Sue?
Me? Oh, you know, there's about 75 different things that we could talk about that have come out of this evening. I really appreciate Barb and Linda and you and Jane sharing your experiences, and I think that we find that we all have a lot of common experiences as we continue to sort of marinate in this whole art and science, and we all have very, very different practices, but just, you know, looking at what's been true for us when we step back from that individual dot on the plate to the larger pattern of stuff, it can very much be a, you know, it can very much be a shared pattern. And I just want to emphasize, just to make, you know, reiterate Barb's point, is that so much of how we are in the world can be influenced by our chronic disease, and you know, just making sure that we're taking time for self-care, that we're not prescribing for ourselves because we can't do a very good job at that, you know, and the value of competent, vitally based healthcare is, I just cannot overemphasize that enough. One of the things that the point that was made when I was doing that 4-year course in Masters in Human Homeopathy is that we're really only able to help people in meaningful ways when we're healthier than those people. Or those individuals, and so it's really, really hard. I mean, we can do crisis management kind of thing when we're sicker, but when we really want to, you know, step up our game, sometimes our time is better spent doing some, you know, curative, vital, dynamic healthcare on our own, rather than spending that time and effort studying or taking another course. And I just cannot overemphasize that enough.
Yeah, and that's what Hahnemann said about Sora. He said he was able to recognize Sora because he doesn't have it.
I'm here to tell you, I got it. It's not done yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, it's like Barb said about anxiety. You know, realizing that was not her. You know, that was not her healthy, vibrant, responsive state. You know, and yeah, and recognizing that as it creeps up upon us. Anyway.
Yep. And
Yeah.
just before we go, sorry.
So I was just going to say before we go, Gregory Pace is going to be with us in May for this webinar.
And I was going to ask you, Sue, if you know what Gregory was about to talk about in May.
He's pretty open. He's pretty open. I don't have an absolutely firm topic from him yet. If it's interesting to continue along these kinds of thoughts, and I certainly know that he's well versed in that. But I don't have a topic from him.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Having said that, you know, I've never heard him talk about stuff that hasn't been interesting or informative. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you, Sue.
Thank you
all
guys
for coming in. We'll
Yeah,
See you
thanks for
next month, and we'll
thanks for
let you know as soon as we know what we'll be doing, talking about in May, June, July, and
yep,
thereabouts. All right.
exactly so. Thanks for
Okay.
going on the bird walk, guys.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.